One of the things that people have been talking about for effective communication from time immemorial that I heard when I was back in high school on a debate team is the 3 C's. All right, be clear, be concise, and be colorful. All right, be clear. If you're lawyers, your vocabulary is way above the average norm. Your ability to construct sentences that have several words in it that have multiple syllables is probably way above average. When you're giving a public speech, now is not the time to show it. All right, now is the time to use clear language, simple language if you can. I'm not saying that you dumb down the substance of your presentation. I actually, despite the cynicism on my part, I actually am agreeably surprised very often by what juries can grasp and what they decide. I've had multi-million-dollar theft of trade secrets that involved cases that involved pieces of technology where we had 15 pieces of technology, separate pieces of technology, some of which we thought were strong, some of which, frankly, we thought were weak. We put them to the jury, and we won on the ones we should have won, and we lost on the ones we should have lost on, frankly, or we had a chance of losing on. This jury that I had in Memphis, Tennessee, had the ability to grasp all that, sift all that, and make the right decision. All right, but you get to that point not by dumbing down the substance, but by being clear, and also by being concise. Okay, if you've prepared properly for the speech, whatever it's about, if you prepared properly for your case, you know way more than you ever have to present to the audience to achieve the objective that you want to achieve. And it's a piece of civil litigation. You probably have half a dozen witnesses that you really don't need to call. You know, you took their deposition just to see what they had to say, just to make sure you weren't surprised at trial. You have to spend a lot of time thinking strategically, both for a speech and for a trial, about how am I going to be concise? How am I going to present the material that I have in a way that doesn't overwhelm my audience? And the final C is that you have to be colorful, all right? You have to use language that is memorable. You have to use, if you can, and it's appropriate, you have to use word pictures, language, turns of phrase that are going to be memorable to a jury, something that's not going to bore them. Talking about, for example, slashing a leg at the artery and swimming with sharks, word pictures like that to illustrate a point, something that'll be remembered. Another group of 3 that coaches in this area have used for years are the 3 V's, the idea that every speech has a verbal component, a vocal component, and a visual component. The verbal component is the words, and the 3 C's are sort of about the words you use, how you organize the presentation. The vocal component is the tone of your voice, your delivery, how you modulate things for emphasis. Do you drop your voice? Do you raise your voice? Do you speak faster? Do you speak slower? Do you pause? What do you do? How do you connect with the audience using your vocal pitch, your vocal delivery? And then finally, there's the visual portion. Now that means audio visuals, of course. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about AV. That's a whole other subject. But it's also what you do with your body. You know, what gestures do you use for emphasis? Do you walk around to try to connect with your audience? Do you stand by the podium to make sure that everything is on your witness? All right, if you want the jury focused on your witness and you're doing direct, I tend to do direct from the back of the courtroom so the jury is just looking at me. When I'm doing cross-examination and I'm the one testifying, I want the jury watching me, so I'll walk around the audience. The visual component is important in every speech. And then finally, it's never a bad idea to think about something that has borne the test of time. And no group of 3 about oral presentation has borne the test of time more than what Aristotle said. His 3 pillars of an effective presentation are that every effective presentation has to make an appeal to the ethos, the logos, and the pathos. My Greek was never good. I studied Latin. I apologize if I butchered that. Your ethos is that every good speech, says Aristotle, has an ethical appeal. You appeal to the listener to say that what you're suggesting, the result you're suggesting, is an ethical and morally appropriate result. Your logos is your appeal to logic. That the result that you're advocating is a result that is supported by the proven facts, the facts that can be inferred, and established facts by common sense. And then finally, every speech has an appeal to pathos, an emotional appeal. And certainly if you're a trial lawyer, particularly in closing argument, we'll talk about that, but in opening too, in my view, every good presentation should have some kind of emotional appeal. Even if, you heard the kind of cases I typically do. I do business cases. I do intellectual property cases. I do cases where I'm usually representing a corporation. how do I make an appeal to pathos under those circumstances? Well, the way you make an appeal to pathos is you humanize your corporate client. You remind the jury of the fact that corporations may not be people for purposes of voting and campaign contributions. That's a little controversial, but corporations are certainly people with respect to the fact that jobs depend on them. They're composed of people that make decisions, people whose decisions have an impact. Corporations have successes, they have failures, they fail to take responsibility. That's how you appeal to pathos, even in a boring commercial or intellectual property case. It's an intellectual property case, you talk about the inventor, you talk about the invention. Or if you're the party that's accused of infringing somebody else's patent, you talk about the fact that this guy stole it from somebody else, and he's standing on the shoulders of somebody else, and the patent isn't enforceable. There's always an appeal to pathos that's possible in any kind of presentation. And that is true, in my judgment, whether your speech is more an informative speech or a persuasive speech. A trial has, in the opening and closing statements, of course, there's elements of both. You both inform the jury and you try to persuade the jury. But even if you're giving a speech like this, where you're just trying to sort of inform, there are always opportunities to be persuasive. There are always opportunities to appeal to pathos. So that, very basically, those are three groups of C. Those are the usual things that people talk about for general effective communication. Another rule is the rule of primacy and repetition. Study after study show that juries in particular and audiences in general remember what they hear first, what they hear last, and what they hear often. So what that means typically for any good presentation, but certainly with respect to a trial, is you develop core points and themes that you start with, that you end with, and that you weave into your entire presentation throughout the course of the speech or trial. This is a case about a broken promise. This is a case about a man who was in a hurry. You know, anything like that, that you start with, that you hang all of your facts on, and that you proceed on the way. Also, focus on your audience. Be reactive to your audience. Look at the people in the back. Make eye contact. It's incredibly important. When you're giving a speech, find out what you can about your audience in advance. I started this presentation by asking you guys, what sort of people do I have in front of me? Usually, ideally, whether it's a trial or whether it's any kind of presentation, you should be able to find out even more. You know, in a lot of courts, they'll give you a veneer of the jury before you see them. You'll have some idea of professional backgrounds, educational backgrounds, etc. Try to tailor your remarks to the audience. And use persuasive language. As I said, no matter what kind of presentation it is, I think persuasive language is always preferable, even if you're simply trying to inform. Try to use word pictures. Try to create visions in the listener's mind. Most people now are visual learners. It used to be it was about 50-50, oral versus visual learners. Now I think, again, because of all these idiot boxes, almost everybody is more comfortable learning visually. That, of course, means use AV, but it also means create pictures for the jury to listen to. Imagine that you're in a murder trial or a tort trial. A lot of opening statements in those cases begin with a description of who was the victim. You know, on such and either you describe with word pictures what the scene of the crime or the scene of the injury looked like, or you talk about the guy's day before whatever it is happened. You know, let me tell you a story about John Smith. On June 5th, he woke up, he had his breakfast, he kissed his lovely wife Martha goodbye, he said goodbye to his beautiful daughter Katie and said, I will be there at that soccer game this afternoon, no matter what happens at work. And 2 hours later, he was dead because of the negligence of that man there. You know, create those word pictures with some kinds of details that the listener can focus on. Use suggestive language throughout. A trial lawyer that is not using suggestive language is not doing his job. I don't do a lot of personal injury work, as you heard, but I would imagine, and I have seen, that if I'm the plaintiff, what do I call the incident? I call the incident the crash, the explosion. If I'm the defendant, I call it the accident, the mishap. You know, whatever. Anytime, any kind of case you can pepper with suggestive language. And use impact phrases. Impact phrases, sometimes they're cliches, sometimes they're action phrases, things which capture something that it would take you many sentences or many paragraphs to explain, such as moving chairs around on the Titanic. You know, how many sentences would it take you to explain that concept? The idea of focusing on something trivial and meaningless and the ultimate form of form over substance. The ship is going down and we're worried about where people are sitting. But that's an easy to remember phrase that people are familiar with. Everybody knows what it means. And that gets you into the subject of persuasive cliches. Persuasive cliches can be useful. You know, a cliche is a cliche, right? We're not supposed to use cliches if we're educated people. But studies show consistently that juries and listeners react to things that are familiar, right? So if you want to explain a concept like the defendant put all of his eggs in one basket, right? It's better to say that than to say the defendant staked everything on a single venture. You know, that was the best translation of that I could come up with. That's terrible. Nobody knows what that means. It makes you sound stiff, right? So even if it is a cliche, putting all your eggs in one basket is a lot better. And again, create themes and phrases that you're going to hang all your facts on. Use them to map to the facts. Imagine you have a case. I had a case. It was, again, a theft of trade secrets and patent infringement case where we were alleging that the defendant stole our client's proprietary technology. It was an engineer and a marketing executive that left our client's employ, started a startup, and gee, what a surprise. They're building the exact same product that our marketing department had said was the next big thing and that we asked them to work on. Right? So our themes in closing were, this was a company, this is a case about need, speed, and greed. Right? These were guys that they knew there was a need out there in the market for this technology. How did they know that? They knew it from us because of our proprietary marketing. They knew it had to be done quickly because they knew the window for acceptance of this technology was 6 months out, so they had to use speed. And they knew there was going to be a huge payoff if they met that window, greed. So how did they do that? Well, because they stole our technology, ladies and gentlemen. You know, whatever those themes are that you're going to use, you hang your facts. That's your map to the facts.